Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for joining the webinar. My name is Fitzroy Andrew. I'm going to be hosting the webinar this evening. And first of all, I mean, we had a lot of people register. So my guess is people are still on their way. So before we go any further, I just want to check that everything is in order and you can both see and hear me. So I wonder whether there is a way that you can either post a message just to let me know that you've got sound and vision, as it were. So if you could do that, those of you that are already in here, and good evening to you, if you could post a message of some sort in the chat, just to indicate that you can hear what I'm saying, then that will be great. We may give it another just couple of minutes just to ensure that everybody is who's due to be here is actually here, but just to check that out for right now. So if you can give some indication that you are hearing what's being said just by typing a message into the chat box, that would be great. There may well be another quicker way of doing it, whether you can wave or something like that, I don't know. But yes, just some indication that you're hearing what I'm saying at the moment, and you've also got some visual as well, that'd be great. Okay, that's great news. Thanks to everybody that's responded so far. It seems as though, right, on the, let me just see, for those who are tuned in, and the numbers are still going up, so that's great. I'm literally going to give it another minute or two before we get going. You should have a panel that's visible to you on your screen. Now, one of the options on that should be chat. Again, perhaps if you can just give me an indication as to whether you can locate that. And then if you click, there's an arrow pointing kind of rightwards towards chat. If you click on that arrow, the panel then expands and you've got a space within which you can enter a question that you'd like to ask. I'm going to propose that that's probably the easiest way of asking questions, and I've no doubt that questions will come up. Again, if you have any trouble locating that during the webinar, then do let me know. Okay, we've so far got 12 people in the room. That's great. We had getting close to 100 actually register. So I'm anticipating that the numbers may well go up even more. What time do I have? Let's just check that out. Let's come out of there for a minute. Okay, yeah, 8:35. I'm literally going to give it another minute or so, then I think we are going to get going, just to respect those who are already here, and so we are making the best use of the time. There's no real kind of cut-off point as far as I'm concerned. There are a number of things that clearly I want to say, which I will get across. But then ideally what we'll do is we'll get into some questions and discussion, and I will do my best to be answering the questions as and when they occur. So that's all good. Right, let's just check. Okay, everyone who appears to have visual and audio, so that's all good. Okay, we've got 12 people. So I'll tell you what, I think what we are going to do is to make a start. So let me just, do I minimize that? That's it, that's great. I'll put that back where it is. So, okay, so formally, again, good evening and welcome to everybody that's joined me for this webinar this evening. Some of you may have been to webinars that I've attended or hosted previously. In case you haven't, my name is Fitzroy Andrew. I'm one of UEL's career coaches, and it's my privilege to be hosting tonight's event. And I'm just trying to get this so that I can see what it is that I am doing. Right, so on your screen right now, you should ideally have a title slide. You may well also have a panel where you can see me as well. The webinar subject this evening is stepping up your LinkedIn game. And my goal is really to put across 3 essential strategies that have worked for me. And this is very much a personal endeavor. I'll say a few more words about that as well. I guess by way of background, we do, I think, an increasing amount of work here at the university with LinkedIn. I think it's a platform that is growing in importance as a recruitment vehicle, but as importantly, in some ways more importantly, as a networking vehicle, as a way of expanding the range and number of connections that you have. And whilst it's a truism to say that who you know is at least as important as what you know, there is, I think, a definite reality to that. And I think it works that way more so in some industries than in others. But in general terms, whether you're a professional who is employed in the conventional sense, or whether you are, as the term is these days, a solopreneur, so you are directly offering your knowledge and know-how and skills to a paying customer. Increasingly for a number of people, actually, it's not one or the other, it's both and then some, and I will put myself into that category, and I will say some more about that during the course of the webinar. You cannot afford to neglect ways of cultivating your audience, your connections, your networks. And in the days before technology, which I am old enough to remember, the way in which you would do that would be to go along to events and find ways of meeting people. And there is still a role for that. I don't think that however sophisticated the technology gets, I don't think it's ever going to replace the value of meeting people face to face. There's always going to be room for that. However, you can exponentially at least prepare the ground for your meetings with people in a way that has not been possible prior to technology. And I would say LinkedIn is the principal platform for that. So it is in everybody's interest, whether you are a current student here at UEL, who I spend a lot of my time working with, or to all of you who have graduated from UEL and I guess at different stages in the past as well. And it being an online platform, there are some interesting dynamics there. You could argue that there's a generation of people who have grown up with online platforms. So for them, you might argue that they are, to use the jargon, digital natives. It's something that is second nature to them. There are equally, alongside those, others who perhaps haven't grown up with online platforms as part of their world. And so there is a learning curve for them. Now, the good news I think about LinkedIn is that it's a relatively easy platform to learn. It's also a free platform to get yourself onto. You can set up a profile and all the rest of it without paying any money at all. There are paid options that you can have. I think they are worth it if you are in a particular space, but there's no absolute need to necessarily use those. So all in all, it makes LinkedIn a worthwhile topic of conversation and one that it is always good to expand the range of things that you know and can do on the platform. So it's very timely, and you are all more than welcome to be here this evening. So let me get into my presentation and just run through where I'm coming from. So as I said, This is very much a personal account. I'll tell a bit of a story about what's happened with my usage of LinkedIn over the course of the last year or so, and also will point the way ahead in terms of how I want to be using it over the next little while, and that's a reflection of my own particular circumstances. So I don't consider myself an expert. I do think I have an affinity with the tech and with online platforms, and if I'm going to stereotype, people of my age are generally presumed not to be particularly familiar with it. I'm fortunate in that I have an aptitude, but I don't consider myself an expert in some way. I think over the last year or so particularly, I put particular time into getting to know the platform and using it in ways in which I will talk about. So I'm going to make a lot of reference to my own LinkedIn platform, my own LinkedIn profile as well. What I would also say is that there isn't a magic bullet. What I'm not saying this evening is that do what I've done and you will get the same results that I have gotten. You may get more, you may get less. I think it's one of those things where certainly a level of consistent application does pay dividends. But I also think that there's some thinking that goes underneath the consistent application, which I will talk about very shortly, which I think is actually what's going to pay off in the long run. Because I think people want to know who it is that they're dealing with. And I want to say a bit about what I mean by who they're dealing with. And as I said, it's an ongoing story. I'm going to focus primarily on what's happened over the last year or so, but I want to conclude at least the material that I want to present with pointing the way ahead for me, because my usage of LinkedIn is going to change over the next year or two as well. And I just want to kind of feed that in to the conversation as a way of just providing an illustration and then leading on ideally to some discussion. Now, I am more than happy to take questions from people as I go along through the slides, because you may want to clarify some of the material that I'm presenting. Clearly, once I've gone through the slides that I have as well, you may then also want to ask a range of questions as well. As I say, I don't have a particular cutoff point in mind in terms of the time. So I'm happy to respond to as much as conversation as there is during and after the material that I present. So that's how I'm planning for things to work. So let's continue. So this story starts a little over a year ago now. It's hard to imagine. We're in the middle of February 2020. It only seemed like the other week it was Christmas, because actually it was the other week it was Christmas, but time flies, as it were. And it so happened that at the beginning of January last year, I flew out to Jamaica. Stayed with a friend of mine for a couple of weeks, and we had a very good conversation about where things were heading for me in career and life terms. You know, I'm at the stage where I have most of my working life behind me. I've been working for 43 years, so I've had a range of things. If you've visited my LinkedIn profile, you'll have had a snapshot of some of what I've done, but I still have things that I want to achieve and want to do. So we had a very good conversation about that in general. And one of the things that I resolved to do when I got back to the UK towards the end of January was that I was going to make much more active use at LinkedIn. So when I got back, one of the things I noted was how many connections I had at that time. And this was a number, 845 connections. Now, for some people, that's already a lot of connections. I've been on LinkedIn since what, 2008, 2007, 2008, something like that. So it's now 12, 13 years that I've been on the platform. So you might argue that for that length of time, that's maybe not that many connections. For others, it might be a lot of connections, but it is what it is. So wind forward to the beginning of January this year. So I thought I would just do a check, because we'd already set up this webinar by that time, and you saw the blurb that I put in the publicity. So I checked on the 1st of January this year, and this was the number, 1,325 connections. So that's another 500 or so connections over the course of a 12 month. And in fact, it was likely less than 12 months, but that's where I am. I will check on what the number is, because I've had some connections add since that time. But if you express that in percentage terms, that's a 56% increase in connections over the course of 1 year. So has a value in and of itself. Sounds interesting, maybe sounds impressive. It's a baseline to work from. I think, as I say, as I get towards the end of the presentation, I want to talk some more about what, now that I have that level of kind of reach, what am I doing with it, and how do I want to develop it further? And I've got some thoughts about that, which I will share with you. So that's what my usage of LinkedIn has produced in terms of an increase in the numbers of connections over the course of the last year. So how did I do that? That's an interesting question. So this was billed as 3 essential strategies, and when I thought about this, it seemed to me that there were 3 core things that I focused on during the last year, which I think directly contributed to. Now, this year so far, I haven't been anything like as active as LinkedIn as I was last year, but I still got connections coming in. So I think there is a way in which you can build up a kind of a critical mass in terms of presence, and I'll say some more about that. And people will start to find you. So I guess there is something about doing the work to build your profile up to a certain level, and then things will start to tick over. So 3 essential strategies that I want to talk about. First, and most importantly, I think, is this one. And it's a question to ask right now, if you've already got a profile on LinkedIn, or if you are seeking to develop your profile on LinkedIn. I think this is a really smart question to ask. Who are you on LinkedIn? Or as I would say in another way, what's your identity on LinkedIn? And what's the identity that you want on LinkedIn? I think that's a really fundamental question to be asking yourself. Now, there is a really useful book that I would recommend people acquire as a kind of an accompaniment to this webinar, which I think will also be available online. So even if you're not able to tune in live, you'll be able to catch the gist of what I'm saying afterwards. So Melanie Dodaro and Miguel Angel Garcia Elizondo, 2 people. Miguel we know very well here at UEL. We first came across him as a client manager for a particular online platform that we use. Since then, he's established himself as an independent practitioner. We bring Miguel in regularly to run sessions for our undergraduate students on LinkedIn, because part of his history is that he spent time working for LinkedIn. So he knows the platform very, very well. And he's collaborated with somebody to produce this book, came out last year. If you have a Kindle Unlimited account on Amazon, you can access the book for free. And I would recommend you do that. A lot of know-how. He knows far more about the platform than I do, but in a way, I'm coming at it as a practitioner and as somebody who is a user of it. And maybe that's going to be a more useful way. But certainly, if you want some of the real technical know-how, Miguel is a great guy to tap into. So that book, LinkedIn for Students, Graduates, and Educators, came out last year. If you get the book, one of the things that you'll see is this diagram here. And this, for me, I think is a really neat way of starting to explore that question of who you are on LinkedIn. And what you can see there are 3 interconnected circles. One of them is purpose, and they're the things that you're good at, core competencies and so on. One of them is values. What are the things that matter to me? What makes me who I am? What do I stand for, if I can say it that way? And then interests, things that you love doing, things that are meaningful to you. And then what you can see is a segment where those circles interlocked, and in the middle there is passion. Now, what I take from that diagram is that your identity will be a combination of those things. And your choice is about what is it of you that you want to be representing on LinkedIn. Is it about your purpose? Is it about your interest? Is it about your values? Is it going to be about a combination of all 3? So if I translate that into my terms, I mentioned my conversation in Jamaica last year. And one of the things that I resolved to do as a consequence of that was to establish a parallel activity for myself alongside the work that I do at UEL. I have a couple of associate relationships with a couple of consulting practices, and I resolved that I would do more work to cultivate those relationships. At the same time, I also resolved that I wanted to establish myself in my own right. I spent a lot of time working with other people, I would say doing good work for other people, and that has had the result of giving profile and prominence to those other people. I figured that from here on in, I want to put an equivalent amount of time to ensure that my profile is being raised. Not out of a sense of ego, but because I know myself as somebody who is able to make a contribution in certain areas and add value in a certain way. And I thought at this stage in my career, it is time for me to make more of that. That meant having a clearer identity for myself online in general, and specifically on LinkedIn. So that's where I started to do some of the things that I'm going to talk about very shortly. In parallel with that, I've been working with a consultant of my own. He's partly a creative, he's partly a coach, he's partly an advisor, really helping me to work out where do I want to focus my business, as it were. And maybe to give you an illustration of that, what I will do now is to go online. And this you should be able to see now, all being well, you should be able to see my LinkedIn profile. So this, if you were to go there today, this is what you would see. So you can see a couple of photographs at the top, and there's my name there, and there are some words I've got underneath. So I talk about achievement mindset for individuals. That's my personal coaching brand. So I do work very much in the realm of careers with individuals outside of the work that I do here at UEL. There's another hashtag there called inclusive leadership. So I'm connected with a particular consulting firm, a place called the Center for Inclusive Leadership. They work with corporates, particularly on the idea of inclusive leadership, which is connected to the conversation about equality and diversity, but I think goes further than that, because every organization has diversity. The choice is, what do you do with it? And what we say is, what you do with it is that you be inclusive. You seek to include and maximize the contribution of everybody in your workforce. And what both of those brands mean, whether it's achievement mindset or inclusive leadership, what I'm focused on, regardless of who I'm working with, is best performance for all, which is why it's the third hashtag that you can see there. So that's what my LinkedIn profile looks like today. And 2 years ago, it wouldn't have looked anything like this. Today, I'm kind of constantly working it. I've worked harder on it. You've got a bit more of a description there underneath, which says a little bit more about who I am. And ideally, that interests people as well. So that's where I am today with my LinkedIn profile. And that's a reflection of what I've said here about determining your identity. I'm using LinkedIn very much as a platform to promote my work as an individual. To some extent, the work that I do here at UEL, but in parallel with that, some of the broader interests that I have in career coaching and in inclusive leadership. And those interests are an agglomeration of that diagram: purpose, interest, values, and passion. That's how I've chosen to manifest that. So I'm not saying that is absolutely how you do it. I'm presenting that to you as an example of how you do it, and you may or may not take something from that in terms of your own interests. Okay, so let's continue then. So that's where I'm starting from. So there's something there. One of the things I've paid particular attention to is what I will call the look and feel of my LinkedIn profile, and just some of the things that I focused on in there. I think it does help to have decent photos, both the profile photo that you can see. So if I go back to the page just for a minute, so the profile photo that you can see there, that was taken at a UEL event last year, and then also the banner profile as well. That was taken at the event I was hosting outside of UEL last October. Both of them were taken by, they weren't, well, one was a professional photographer, or he does a number of things. The other was actually a student here at UEL from a photography course, so I was a photography graduate as well. The point being, I think it does make a difference to the appearance of your profile if your photography is decent. Does that mean finding a photographer and paying money to them and getting some portrait shots and so on? If you so choose, but you don't need to go about it that way. If you set yourself up in the right way, you could get perfectly good photographs using your mobile phone. You need to be in the right lighting and in the right background and so on, and get somebody to help you with that. But so it doesn't necessarily mean going out and spending lots of money. It does mean paying attention to the quality of the image that appears, because on LinkedIn, your photographs are also going to be downsized. So there's going to be an impact on the quality of what it is that you see. So it's worth thinking, I think, about the investment that you make in the quality of the images that you use. Have your headline reflect your identity. So again, I showed you what I did that I have on my profile, and that's very much a reflection of the activities and the kind of brand that I'm looking to promote in terms of the work that I do in parallel with UEL. I think that what a lot of people do, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, is to have their headline reflect their current role. I suppose my question for you to think about would be, what is it that you really want people to say? Because those are the words that appear directly underneath your name. And for me, there is something more impactful about having that headline reflect the kind of identity that you want to be promoting on LinkedIn. Now, it may be that you want to promote your identity in terms of the role that you're currently playing. No problem with that at all. If you're thinking about who you want to be on LinkedIn, is maybe broader than that. So you're thinking about the kind of work portfolio that you want. I mean, people like us tend to talk about portfolio careers. So you have your main 9 to 5, and then you've got your side kind of hustles, if you want to call them that. And I think increasingly that is going to be the way of work for us all in this society, and I think in the Western world generally, that it may be that you want a headline that reflects that broader identity that you have. And I think that there will come a point where that may well be the direction in which you want to move. So by all means, have something that is very specific about your current role, but maybe consider if the identity that you want is broader than the role that you're in at present. You want to say something about who you are as a person, what you're interested in, what you're aspiring to. Think about whether or not you want to have a headline that is a broader reflection of the identity that you want to promote for yourself. And then underneath that, you'll have the detail in your history. And the value of LinkedIn is that it very much represents an online CV. And I would say it's worthwhile thinking about how much you want in there. I don't think you need to go back through your entire work history. I mean, for me, that would mean going back over 43 years. There is just no need to go into that level of detail. But again, if I just refer very quickly to what I've got on my profile. So I have my current role here at UEL. I don't know how visible that is for you. Hopefully you can see that. Then I've got some of the associate roles that I have at the Center for Inclusive Leadership, at the Change Institute, and at Eastside Young Leaders Academy. And then one of the non-exec director roles I have. And then I go back through some other roles that I've held in recent years as well. So that promotes, going back over the last, let's have a look. I'll go back in total to 1995. So I'm really profiling the last 25 years of my experience. Now, the further back in history I go, the less I tend to say, because I don't think it serves the purpose necessarily to include everything and everything about what it is that I've done over the entirety of my working life. But I do want to give people a sense of my longer background, so that when I'm selling myself as somebody who somebody might want to do business with, they have a sense as to what it is that I have in my background and in my armory, as it were. So I think for me, as somebody with the length of working experience that I have, it serves a purpose to go back that far. For you, depending on where you are in your career, you need to make a judgment about how far you go back. I would say a decade, 15 years is probably, that will be more than fine. And then, as I say, if I look at the more recent roles, I go into a little bit more depth about what it is that I'm doing and the organizations that I create. But however you do it, having a clear chronology and profile of the roles that you've held over a period of time, I would say is an absolute necessity, so that people, again, they see the headline and then they can see what's behind the headline and they can form their own opinion as to, okay, I'm interested, I want to connect with this person or not. Okay, so back to my presentation. And then endorsements and recommendations. This is interesting because this is something that I have consciously not chosen to pursue greatly. I think I have one endorsement on my profile, and that was gained a long, long time ago. So that may well be something that I will seek to develop in the future as time goes on. But I would say, if you can, no doubt, in terms of the way that LinkedIn works, having endorsements and recommendations is definitely something that will add value to your profile as a whole and will just make it look something that is more impressive. So just a few points there about the look and feel. And I can recall last year when I was starting to do the work on LinkedIn, these were the things that I kind of worked on first of all before I went on to do some of the other stuff that I'm about to go on and talk about. So this, I think, is the foundation of kind of stepping up your game. Who are you? And how does your profile, because that's what people are going to see when they land on your LinkedIn page, what does that profile say about you? And these, I think, are just some of the things that it's worthwhile thinking about. It'd be great if there are any questions or observations on that. We can maybe pick those up now, or I can continue. So the next phase, and this is the second of the 3 essential strategies, and it's all about content. So good, he said it's 3 times: content, content, content. So again, let me switch out of here and go to my LinkedIn profile again. So by content, what I'm really talking about is the activity. So you can see here, this is in fact, that post at the top there, that's the only post that I've made so far this year on LinkedIn. And what I'm doing there is connecting to somebody else's post. Now, the commentator of that post is somebody who I think has some really insightful things to say about gender at work and in the workplace. And it's a really interesting article on Forbes. So you may or may not want to check that out if that's something that you're interested in. But by and large, what I've done, occasionally I'll link to other people's work. Yep, there's a connection there to Miguel for when his book was published. That was late last year. That was great. And then that was an event that I was hosting last year. And again, some photographs there that were taken at the event. So that just gives you an idea. So you've got a combination there of things that I've created for myself. This is from a conference that I was speaking at last year. And again, had somebody there, fortunately, on hand to take some photographs as well. So that's a reflection of what I've been doing. Now, let me go back to my presentation because I can say some more about the specific approach that I took here as regards content. What I started off by doing, if we were to go back earlier in the year to around about this time last year, March, April, we were having conversations within UEL and within the Centre for Student Success about how we could use social media much more to drive engagement from students and with alumni with what it is that we offer. So I put a lot of effort into being present at Centre for Student Success events. Photography is an interest of mine. So I took photographs at the event and then I'll create posts on LinkedIn reflecting what was going on. And I would say I was doing maybe 2 or 3 posts a week based around Centre for Student Success. Now, that was the thing, when I look back on it, that was really starting to drive traction in terms of attracting people to my profile and then people connecting with me. A fair number of those were students, but there were people also outside of UEL who were also connecting with what it is that I was saying. At around the same time, I started to do some work on my own business brand. And at that stage, the thing that I was looking to develop was inclusive leadership. So if you were to go to my website, certainly, and this is the case today, it's going to change very shortly, what you see there is very much a focus on inclusive leadership. So I was starting to incorporate posts around that particular theme. I ran a workshop in at Leeds University in August, and again, had a photographer with me. So I was able to create some posts around my conference presentation, and that again helped to start to build some traction and some interest in connecting with me. Now, much more recently, as I say, my coaching brand I've been developing, and it's around this idea of an achievement mindset, which is really around how you go about selling yourself in a careers and job seeking context. And my work will be about helping people really bring out their achievement mindset, not only on paper in their CV, but also in terms of how they operate and how they think about themselves, which is why I talk about it as a mindset. So as time goes on, much more of my posting will be reflecting that particular interest alongside inclusive leadership. Now, the point about that, those are work for me, but the point I'm making is that really, if you're going to start to create some content, what you need are some drivers of that. What are the things that you want to become known about and talk about? And for me, these were my drivers. You will need to determine your own drivers. But however you go about doing it, I think what really helps to give some focus to what it is that you say is to have some drivers for the kind of content that you create. Now, in creating content, I think there are a number of things that are worth bearing in mind. First of all, is just making the time to post. It doesn't necessarily take long. It needn't take long, but I think it is about creating the time and space in your mind and in your schedule to be able to do it. Now, as you saw on the selection that I gave you there, what you post does not need to be stuff that you create. Absolutely. If you see something else out in the wider world that reflects your brand, your identity, you can identify with that and connect with that. Though what I would say is if you are going to use other people's content, it's a good idea to add your own thoughts to what it is that they're saying rather than just connect to it and say, well, yeah, I like that. So you retweet on Twitter, you might retweet something, you might not add any comment to it, and the retweeting is the thing. I think with LinkedIn, adding your own thought, it might only be a line or two that you add to it, but that I think can just help to put your own mark on a piece of content rather than just sharing the content because it's there to be shared. Nothing wrong with that. I think it just adds more if you're adding your own thought to it. And whatever you add to it, it doesn't need to be lengthy. Literally a sentence or two, I think, is all it takes because people will connect with that, they'll read that, and they'll start to make the association. Certainly that was my experience. Sometimes you have to explain what it is that you're doing, and it might take a kind of a sentence or two. But the less you write, I think less is definitely more. So it's about an economy of words, I think. And I think the other habit to get into is about posting regularly. Now, I say posting regularly. What I don't necessarily mean is posting frequently. As I say, it does take time. Now, if you set yourself up to try and post every day, if you genuinely have the time to do that, all well and good. For me, I found that that wasn't something that I was able to maintain. And once you start to get into a rhythm of posting and you start to attract some interest and some following, people will start to check on what it is that you're posting and they will adjust to the rhythm that you create for yourself. So if you create a rhythm around daily, then what you do is to some extent create an expectation that you'll continue to post daily. And with the best will in the world, sometimes that won't be possible. So sometimes it's worth thinking about maybe posting less frequently, but at a frequency that you know you can maintain. So whether that's weekly, fortnightly, maybe even monthly, entirely up to you. The point, I think, is to make it regular because that helps for people to adjust their expectations to what it is that you have to say. But there is certainly something about getting into a routine and a rhythm of posting in order to start to attract the interest and boost up your followers and your connections on somewhere like LinkedIn. So again, these are things that I found that I did, and they certainly worked for me because I did start to find that regularly I was getting 10, 15 connections a week, and that process continued. So I acquired, as I say, 500 connections over the course of 2019. So we've had who are you on LinkedIn, we've had content. So here's the third of my essential strategies that I found work for me. And it's what I talk about as push and pull connecting. And certainly I'm finding that this is becoming a more significant part of the overall coaching work that I'm doing, both with students here at UEL and also outside, about how people start to develop what they want in terms of their careers, job seeking, developing their business. So let me say a bit more about what I mean by push and pull. Something that really worked very well for me is that whenever I create a post, whether it was about a CFSS event, whether it was about something else that I was doing, if I knew that there was somebody who was maybe present at that event that I connected with, I would at them when I created the post. Why? Because they will immediately get a notification that you've added them. And if they are not already a connection of yours, by and large, they may well become one if you mention them in your post. And all it takes is that if you start with @ and then you start typing their name, usually LinkedIn will auto complete it. So it will pick up who it is that you're trying to connect with, and then you can fill in their name. It will be highlighted in the post. They will get a notification that you have connected, you've added them in your post, and that just completes the loop. So really something that's worthwhile doing. And even when you are connecting somebody else's content, if you know that there is somebody who's a trend and you want to attract to that, you can at them as well in doing that. So it's a small thing, but it's a habit that I think is really worth cultivating, particularly if you want to follow up on a face-to-face meeting with them reinforcing that with a connection on LinkedIn. So at people when you post. Along the same lines, hashtags, use hashtags. People search on LinkedIn often using hashtags. So you can search for hashtags yourselves that are a reflection of the kind of interest that you want to be promoting on LinkedIn, which in turn will be a reflection of your identity on LinkedIn. So for me, there'll be around inclusive leadership, there'll be around career coaching, there will be around career development, there'll be around student development, and so on. All of those things. So using hashtags in your posting at a matter of course, absolutely something that will help you to develop traction and interest. As importantly, it's about reaching out as well as receiving. Now, I acquired 500 or so connections over the course of the first year. That was people seeking me out. If I think about how many people I directly sought to reach out to over that same period, it would just about reach double figures. Now, is that a problem? Not necessarily, though it is something that I think I certainly intend to change. If your goal is to cultivate networks from the point of view of maybe that next job move, developing your career, developing your offering as a solopreneur, as a business person, then reaching out is absolutely something that you need to do. So that's really the push and pull dimension. As well as attracting people in, that's the pull, you also want to push. You want to push yourself out there, reach out to people, identify the people that's in your interest to get to know, depending upon the direction in which you want your career to develop, and make a point of reaching out to them. Sometimes you can do that, first of all, by sending them a message and they're saying that you're interested in. Other times, if you know that you've already got your own brands, you can then approach them and make that connection and then have a little explanatory message when you're sending the invitation, and immediately they will visit you, they will see what you're about, and they will clearly make the judgment about whether or not you're somebody that they want to connect with. But it's pushing and pulling, finding people to come to you by all means, but also going out and finding people that you want to connect with as well. I do think that having a blend of both of those is really important. And it may be that one of those is more important at some times than at other times. For me, I can see that the reaching out is going to be becoming more and more important. I am going to want to get to know the kinds of people that I'm going to want to work with, either as partners or as potential clients. If I sit around and wait for those people to come to me, I'll be doing a lot of waiting. I need to be proactive and go out there and find those people as well. And at all times, be selective. Occasionally, you will get contacts from people that you have absolutely no connection with. They're coming from the other side of the world. They're not connected with anybody else that you know. They've maybe just taken a look at your profile, like the look of it, and want to try something. Up to you as to whether or not you accept that connection. There is no obligation that just because somebody wants to connect with you, you're not obliged to connect with them. Have a think about what value there is in it for you. Maybe if you just want to connect with anybody and you want to be friendly, that's fine, no problem. For me, in terms of what it is that I'm doing, I'm starting to draw a distinction between those that I will readily accept a connection from, students and other potential clients, and those I'm thinking, okay, no harm done, but I'm not seeing where the connection is with me. And it may be that time will come around where I see the value in connecting with that person. But for me, I think there are times once your network starts to build to exercise a little bit of selectivity in who you connect with. So almost done. Just want to say a few words about where I'm going to be taking my LinkedIn profile and activity next, building on the last year or so. As I say, this has been the most sustained year of activity that I've had on LinkedIn, and it's delivered the numbers in terms of the connections. And that's a great place to start. What I've also done, as I've explained, is to refine what my brand offering is. Now I'm very clear. I've got my achievement mindset, career coaching. I've got my inclusive leadership, which is much more of a corporate offer. Those are the two offerings that I'm going to want to push over the course of the next year and beyond. And that will form the basis of what will drive my LinkedIn activity over the course of the next year. So if you choose to follow me or you're already following me, look out, and that's what you're likely to see much more of as time goes on over the course of the next year or so. For me, that's going to mean more of an emphasis on content creation. Yes, I will connect into what other people are saying, but one of the activities that I'm hoping to develop in connection with one of the firms that I'm associated with is to become one of their thought leaders and to help them promote their ideas and their practice in the wider world using LinkedIn as a platform for that. That's going to mean a lot more by way of original content creation for me. That is certainly the way in which I'm going to be wanting to develop my offering. Doesn't mean to say I'm not going to hook into other people's stuff where it connects with what it is that I'm doing. But for me and the direction in which I want to go, content creation is definitely going to be a direction in which I'm going to be moving. And ultimately, because I'm using LinkedIn as a business platform, one of the things I'm going to need to think about more critically is it's one thing to have connections. Ultimately, in a business context, what you really want is to convert those connections into clients in some way, or to work with them such that you are able to access people who might well become your clients. So thinking a little bit more in a focused way about the value that I'm realizing from the connections over and above having the connections there in and of themselves. Now, if you're not into selling your own services as an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, maybe it's about securing your next career move. It's still a form of conversion that's required. It's one thing to have the connections there, so you're starting to broaden your network. There may well come a point where you want to convert those connections into something more tangible by way of result. And there's no harm in starting to advance your thinking about how you're using your LinkedIn connections to that end as well. And then again, to make that point, for me, it's not going to be enough for me to expect, because I'm on LinkedIn and I have a profile on the web, that people are necessarily going to be coming to seek me out. They will only come and seek me out if I do a certain amount of going out there and seeking them out in the first place. So for me, my reaching out is going to become more and more important. There may be partners that I'm seeking to work with. There may be people who fit the general profile of clients that I'm seeking to attract. But rather than attracting 500 connections where I haven't really done any of the work, that is going to change for me in future. I'm going to be doing a lot more work to reach out to the kinds of people that I want to reach out to, such that I can get that kind of connection. That's pretty much it in terms of what I wanted to present for the webinar this evening. So hopefully that's been of some value. I really just want to throw things open now. If there are any questions that anybody wants to ask, and I'm more than happy to respond. Now, what you might want to do is, if you go to the chat box in your menu, then you might want to type the question in there. Alternatively, there is a questions panel, and I'm going to maximize that. So whichever works. If you want to type your questions into the chat box, you can type them there. Or if you want to type them into the questions box, you can type them there, whichever works for you. Happy to take on any questions or comments or observations on anything that I've had to say during the course of this webinar. Okay, and had a thank you for the webinar, and I want to thank you for being here as well. Excellent. I've got a point here. Peter Hallcastle. Peter, really thanks for your point. Point about identity is so important. If everyone stuck to it, we see less Facebook on LinkedIn. Yeah, I hear that. That's a really interesting point, because I think LinkedIn has been very much like Facebook in the professional world. And you do see people who sometimes put what you might call their personal business on LinkedIn. And I think what I see happening is that LinkedIn is becoming more and more significant as a professional platform, particularly in a recruitment context. And I think that as that effort becomes more pronounced, I think that the personal stuff that we see on LinkedIn will increasingly become displaced, because people will see it as just not the place. You know, you want to do that on Facebook, do that on Instagram. I think that's probably a more appropriate place. And there's a whole conversation actually about how you can use Instagram in a professional context as well. One of the things that I've done, I've had an Instagram account for a number of years. It's only really in the last year that I've started to utilize it in any kind of strategic way. Yeah, I get the point about displacing the noise. I think that's one of the things that is probably will happen at the level of community action. But yeah, I absolutely take that point. Got a question here from Judith. Do you think defining your professional role with your interest through LinkedIn is a strategic choice? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that idea about that I've expressed as identity, that is absolutely a strategic choice. And I think for us, as in the world of work at this particular time, given the pace of change, the way that technology is driving that change, okay, in your case, this will mean combining my role as a doctor of psychology with my emerging art career. Well. You might want to do that. And actually, are they connected in terms of your practice? So as a doctor of psychology, is that a kind of a license to practice in terms of work that you might do with clients? And is there a way in which art might connect with that? I mean, just to give you a parallel, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, one of the things I do is to present a radio show. And music has been a long-standing interest of mine. And I'm looking for ways in which I can tie in my interest in music with the coaching and other professional work that I do. Now, one way of doing that will be to think about podcasting. Now, for you, that might not work in quite the same way, because depending upon what you mean by art, if you're talking about a visual art, then the obvious way of connecting that might be to look at how you use video as part of your work, and then finding a way of blending your interest in art with whatever your professional interest is. Okay, question here from Danny. If that's the Danny I think it is, how you doing, sir? I suspect you might want to follow the link that I sent you because you're identified here as an organizer. And your question, Danny, is why do we focus on inclusive leadership at the senior end? And that's a great question. My response to that is that certainly in the work that I do, I try not to, because I think that increasingly corporate leaders at the top of the organization cannot know everything there is to know about what is going on in their organization, and cannot do everything they need to do in their organization, certainly in by way of promoting inclusive leadership. You'll find inclusive leaders at every level, and the challenge for organizations in that context is to give credence and recognition to the leaders that they have working at different levels in the organization. That is very much counter to the way that I think a lot of organizations have worked up to now. What I'm seeing and hearing is that organizations are increasingly recognizing the necessity and the value of not being assessed with what happens at the top of the organization. There is too much to do and too much to understand to rely solely on people in the executive suite to make things happen in the organization. That is, for me, is one of the most important drivers of inclusive leadership. Now, could I say that every organization is starting to work in that way? No, but the smarter ones certainly are, because they're recognizing that the more of the leadership effort that they can harness from across the organization at different levels, the more likely they are to succeed. And I think it's a sign of very smart corporate leadership where they are starting to move their corporate culture in that direction. But is it the norm? Absolutely not at the moment. I think we've still got a way to go, which I guess is good news for people like me who are interested in working with corporates on those kinds of issues. Okay, so yeah, thanks to all for those. Some great questions and some observations in there. Still got time for some more if anybody is interested in continuing the dialogue. Okay, I think you might have heard something. I've just had an email from a student who is sending me their CV, so I should look at that at some stage. Okay, we are now at 7:25. We've notionally allocated about 45 minutes for the webinar. So unless there are any final questions, comments, or observations that people want to make. Okay, so I am minded to draw this conversation to a close. Again, I want to say a really massive thank you for everybody that's joined me on this session. I've had a great time presenting it. As I say, this is just my personal story that I was telling, but hopefully there's been something in there of value for you all. By all means, as career coaches, we are available to you at any stage. So that your being a graduate still means that you have access to us, as well as the broader offer that the Centre for Student Success makes available. So once again, thank you for your time and your participation this evening. There will be a video recording of this webinar available on one of the UEL YouTube channels at some stage in the distant future. I think it's been Camille who's been liaising with you as far as promoting this webinar is concerned. She will take responsibility for ensuring that is made available. So for those who maybe weren't able to join us live and direct during the broadcast, there will still be a way of accessing what we've spoken about here. So again, thanks very much for your company this evening, and I wish you all the best with your careers and your endeavors with LinkedIn in the future. Thank you very much.